All right. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Interview with an Artist with Jeff Deering. Here I'm with Randy Gallegos, one of my favorite artists from even back in the Ice Age era. So, Randy, what I typically like to do when I do these interviews is just get a feel for what brought you into this world. You know, what got you started in the industry. You know, how did you get that path started?
Sure. My path was pretty early. I started working for Wizards of the Coast in 1994. I was still in art school. It was my last year of art school. I was 19 years old, and they were the game was really just getting going at the time. So it wasn't something that I had in
high school.
That was my third year of art school.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
At 19.
Long story. And so I always wanted to be a fantasy illustrator, but at the time that meant, Dungeons and Dragons, book illustration, things that was like, more of the path.
TSR.
Exactly. Yeah. So the whole magic thing kind of came up, while I was still in college, and very quickly started to grow. And a friend of mine told me that art director Jesper Meerfors, he was the first art director and also an early magic artist, was going to be in San Francisco doing a card signing at a game store. And a buddy of mine who was a little more clued into magic than I was like, "Hey, you should go meet the guy and talk to him." And I was like, "That sounds like a great idea." So I didn't even have a portfolio ready at the time, because I was not done with school yet, and so I just brought a bunch of paintings over, frankly, and maybe a couple of slides even, because it was 1994, and that's what you did.
Right.
And I went and basically waited for him to finish the signing and asked him to come over and take a look at my work, which he did. And they had just finished assigning The Dark, unfortunately, so he couldn't get me on that. But he's like, "We had this other game we're starting up, which was Vampire. He was really struggling." He said, "Why don't we start you up there, and then we'll see how it goes." And so I said, "Great." And so I did those, and then the rest is history.
That's pretty awesome. So I got to ask, did you graduate high school early?
I did, yeah. I graduated high school at 16.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You were able to skip a couple grades?
I started third grade, and my birthday's in October, so I got to start kindergarten at 4.
Oh wow!
When I was almost 5.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually graduated a little early myself. I was a little lazy about it. I didn't jump into college like you did.
Yeah, it was great for me because I knew what I wanted to do by 9th grade or whatever. So getting out a little early and just getting to it.
Yeah, that's awesome to have the fast track to what you wanted to do in life. Yeah. And you met your high school sweetheart and you're married.
That's right. Yeah, my wife Monica, I met my junior year of high school.
Okay.
And
was she a freshman? Or?
She was a senior actually. I was a junior. She was a senior. So she graduated ahead of me, and then we just stayed together all through college. And right after she graduated from college, we got engaged and got married.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So you say you got started with Vampire. What were some of the first illustrations you did for that?
That first set, some of the cards that were better played in that set would be like Wake with Evening's Freshness, Cloak the Gathering, and there were a couple others. They weren't very good, frankly. The Wake with Evening's Freshness was the best of the bunch. I don't know, it was I cracked under pressure, shall we say, and also like I was doing them at the same time as my final projects, and I didn't quite have the mind to really differentiate importance at the time. Like when you're in college, you're like, oh, final projects, I'm paying for college, I should apply myself to those, as opposed to like, actually this is your first real client, you should probably prioritize that instead of your classwork. So I was trying to do them both at the same time, and so they both kind of suffered.
Busy,
It was a really busy spring. Yeah.
So where did you go to art school?
I went to the California College of the Arts in Oakland, California.
Okay. And you're still in that area, right?
I grew up in San Jose, and I used to commute from South San Jose to Oakland to go to school. And then currently I live up in Sonoma County, north of the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay. And then in between, we spent about 12 years living elsewhere. And then we came back 5 years to go back to California.
That's awesome. So where did you go in between?
In 2005, we spent a year and a half living in Europe. We were in Italy, England, and Spain for about 6-7 months each or so. And we spent a little time in Asheville, North Carolina, and then 7 years in New York City.
Oh, wow. What took you to New York?
We were living in Asheville, and we were going to go. We were hoping we'd save some more money there and then go to Australia and Japan next. But there wasn't a great job market in Nashville for my wife to get work, so we couldn't save as much as we wanted. that year, the World Fantasy Convention happened to be in New York, upstate New York, in Saratoga Springs, as it was, and I was going to show in that convention.
Okay.
And so the thought was, well, maybe we'll drive up to the show, and why don't we just like call it the end of Asheville and just move to New York City, because she could get better work there, and and we could resume that plan of saving some money to go abroad again. So that was as much thinking as it took. I had never been to New York before, even.
Really?
Yeah, but that whole period of life was living by the seat of our pants and just kind of making decisions, of where to go. For instance, when we left Italy to go to England, we didn't have even a place to stay or an apartment until about a week before we went. So I wouldn't live that way now, but we were a little more risk tolerant at the time, shall we say.
Oh, that's awesome. So, was it always a goal of yours to live abroad?
It was a goal of my wife's in particular.
Okay.
She did a lot of traveling. She took a year off in college to go travel around the world, and so she did that. And I had started traveling for Magic, in the 90s. So I got to do some international travel as well, and enjoyed it a lot. And she'd always wanted to live abroad, and the fact that I worked from home meant that we had a better shot at doing that.
Right.
So, we saved up some money ahead of time, and then, she quit working, while we were abroad. She didn't have a visa or anything, and I basically, worked a lot during that period.
That's probably true to sustain the lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually cheaper to live in the places we lived in Europe than to live in Silicon Valley at the time.
Or in New York, I'm sure.
Or in New York, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a common theme. Did you get a study under any artists or any other people while
we were there? No, we were in really small towns, villages even. So, I was just pretty much holed up and illustrating and painting like all the time. I'd come back in the summers to, do conventions and stuff like that, and then I'd fly back, get back to work.
Were you able to travel much and see?
A little bit, yeah. In each place, we did try to take a little time to, take advantage of the fact that we were there.
Right.
Do some sightseeing.
Yeah, I've done some travel, and it definitely helps to have some time to explore, especially those little areas, because on general trips, you don't really get that.
That's right.
And you mentioned your wife would get work, and what does she do for work?
My wife has done different kinds of office work, throughout the years. Currently, she actually works for a nonprofit that's working regarding climate change. So that's what she's doing at the moment.
That's great. Yeah. So, what was your first art assignment for Magic the Gathering?
So the Vampire happened in the spring of '94,
right.
And then it was kind of quiet through the summer, and then it was kind of like late fall or whatever when the Magic art director, who now was Sandra Everingham, gave me a call to put me on Ice Age, and I did 9 cards for them. And that included things like Dance of the Dead, Vexing Arcanics. Those would have been like the more playable of that bunch of cards. And those were the assignments that they gave me.
Okay. So, which one do you remember working on first? I just try to. What I'm leading into is kind of your process.
I worked up the sketches kind of all at once. I don't remember which sketches I did first. And then once I got them approved, I kind of just stacked up the boards, grabbed them all and just started working. And I might finish one before another. I don't remember which one was the first one, to be honest. It might have been Melting, I think. Melting was a land for Ice Age, or no, it wasn't. It was destroyed a snow-covered land or something. So it must have been a sorcery or something.
Was that one the one unused?
No, it was used. Yeah. And I don't know why I would have started with that one. It was just whatever. I had a pile of boards. It's just like, let's get
this. Well, when you got 9 cards to work on, I'm sure there's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and there were a couple actually that I ended up doing like a couple of versions of them. Like the paintings were smaller, and they went a little quicker at that time. I mean, I did 9 in a month, plus a couple of alternate versions. Where now I can only do like 2 Magic cards a month. Just because they're larger, they're more involved, they're more detailed. Like for Cold Snap, for instance, actually the one that was printed was the second version I did. I did one, and I wasn't happy with it, so I started over and did a second one, which was the one they printed. I still wasn't happy with that one, to be honest. And but I moved on, finished the rest of the set, and turned them in. And then a couple of weeks later, I had a third idea for the piece, and so I actually did another painting, a third version of Cold Snap. And I sent it to them, and I said, hey, if you want to use this one instead, this one I'm cool with. I would be happy using this one. And I think they had already moved forward in production. And
Yeah, it's
they're
kind of
like, yeah, we're fine with the one you gave us. We'll use that one.
Yeah.
So there's 2 more versions of that painting. Actually.
Yeah, it's funny that I actually got to visit with the artist Bradley Williams, who's local to me, and his collection has one of your alternate arts for Homerin, which I thought was really cool.
Which one was that? That was
It was like an undersea.
I think it was Title Control. He has an alternate art for Title Control.
Right.
Yeah, actually, if you remind me, I'll send you a scan of it.
Okay.
Since that way people can see it.
Yeah, I'll try to throw it in the image inside.
Yeah, sure.
Figure all that out.
Yeah, and that was the same. At that time, I don't know, in those early years of illustrating, because I was still, I was unripe, shall we say. Like, I was just out of school. A lot of magic artists weren't quite right yet. And so there were a number of times, especially because the paintings went a little quicker, where I actually did do that. Like, if I had a little more time at the end, it's like, you know what, now that I've thought more about it, I have another idea, I'll just like paint it up and see if they'll use it. And it didn't really happen. There weren't many opportunities where they actually took the alternate that I did after the fact. Usually, again, because production moves on and they don't have time to look back. But the one time that did work was in a year or two later, I did the cover for the Duelist magazine, issue number 9. And they had a Netrunner theme for the cover on that one, which is a little different than the prior issues. And since I had done a bunch of work for Netrunner, they said, hey, why don't you do like a Netrunner themed or some kind of sci-fi themed cover? And I actually did a cover all the way to finish on that one. And I sent it to them. Actually, it was in Seattle when I just like gave it to them. And I could tell that they weren't like entirely thrilled by it. And I was like, do you have a little more time? They said, well, yeah, there's a little bit more lead time. I said, let me just paint another one for you because I can tell that you're not thrilled by this. And so I went home and painted another one, and that's the one they ran with, and they were happy with it.
Oh, it's interesting to hear how many, I see like different artists, how they submit multiple thumbnail sketches.
That's right.
They'll pick one and run with it.
Yeah, and in this case, like that first cover, they had approved the sketch and all that, it's just that in the end, once they finally saw the final thing, they kind of were like, you can tell people when they're like, oh, that's nice.
But it wasn't quite what they were
But it wasn't quite what
the
reaction was. To be clear, I don't do that anymore. Like that stopped in the mid-90s, I think.
Yeah.
As I got better, and it's not necessary. It hasn't been necessary.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see that you're still working on the game. You mentioned you have some cards coming out. I know you can't talk about them.
Sure.
You have some, which is exciting. I think one of your fan favorites is Soul Warden.
Soul Warden is, that's the free bird of my career in music analogy or whatever. It's like, there's a few. Over the years, you end up with like some greatest hits, and they might not be the ones that you even intended to be your greatest hits. But Soul Warden would definitely be like,
what was your process for that card? What was the inspiration process?
There's some people have noticed that in the print I sell of it, there's a detail that's different than in the printed card, and that was that what they wanted was this kind of like priestess or whatever, and because you gain life when a creature enters the playfield. At the time in that world, they had, because they did the style guides were going by then, they had created a creature called Kor, K-O-R.
Oh, yeah.
And they wanted, in the initial brief, they were asking for maybe like a procession of these Kor creatures to be passing before her, and for her like enchantment or whatever to be kind of like resting on each of their heads or something like that. Excuse me. I didn't think that was, I didn't love that idea so much, and I wanted to more focus on the character, with the enchantments. So I kind of, put the camera in closer, and you can see that there's one of these Kor in the lower right, like passing before her. Oh. And it has one of the little glowy things over its head. And it was kind of more just to kind of fulfill that aspect of the illustration. But I didn't love it myself, so I actually painted that portion on like an animation cell, essentially.
Oh,
so they could photograph it with it on, and then I got it back and just removed it.
No, that's
and
great.
no one notices, and no one thought it lacked flavor because of that choice.
No, the whole, her hair's flowing, and she's,
I thought she was, such a captivating character that you kind of didn't need the rest.
Right.
And she is the Warden, and and there's you've got enchantments happening.
The Kor people are very pale and very, almost stark white. So,
And
having color in her face, I think, gives her more character.
Yeah, and in this case, because the guy was, the Kor character was so close to the camera and kind of out of the light pool that she's standing in, he was actually just in shadow, so you couldn't even really see him that much.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So what are you doing primarily these days? I know magic is one of your aspects of your work, but I've seen you do landscapes and other illustrations.
Yeah, about 5 years ago or so, kind of by happenstance, I started experimenting in some other genres a little bit. Moving back to California also was an influence, just because the landscape up in Sonoma County is gorgeous. I've always liked landscape painting, and I would engage in like outdoor landscape painting, just kind of like for fun or whatever, every once in a while. But it wasn't anything I really devoted any serious time to. So the last few years, I've been doing less illustration overall. Magic is essentially my primary client right now, just because there aren't enough good paying clients, frankly, especially in the gaming world. And a lot of the book industry stuff, which was what I originally wanted to get into illustration for, because I love story illustration, I love fantasy novels and science fiction novels. That industry has changed to using a lot less illustration, so there's just not a lot of work in that field. So as I kind of bring up some of my illustration down, at least for the time being, a little bit, I've been doing more landscape work, still life painting, like galleries and things. And then I started up a series of formal still lifes, video game hardware. Yeah, which is kind of like an ongoing side project of mine. And in a way, it's kind of one of my favorite things I'm doing. It's just, it kind of touches, a lot of points of what I love and what I do. And people have really enjoyed the paintings as well.
Yeah, and we're actually here at Magic Fest Reno, and you actually have that original Xbox controller.
Yeah, I usually bring, because there's a lot of them are, the controller paintings are small. I paint the hardware so it looks actual size.
Yeah.
So the controllers, they're kind of small paintings. And I bring them just to show, because people, I bring some prints to these events from that.
Right.
And people enjoy them, but at first, even though like I paint a little thicker and a little looser than I do in my magic work for that, people still think that they read as photos.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I don't love that, but I get what they mean, that it's very realistic or it looks real. And so I usually bring a painting to kind of show people to see that.
And then you had a gorgeous painting of a picture of a tree landscape that was shown in St. George recently.
That's right. I'm a member of the Oil Painters of America, and every year they have an annual juried show. And I've managed to get into that a few times, and last year that landscape was part of that annual show that was there.
I actually reached out to you because I was interested. It's a beautiful piece. Did you end up selling it?
I did end up selling it.
Congratulations on
Thank you.
Then finally, what I'd like to kind of end with is, what would be your advice to people that are looking to get into the illustration or fine art industry? How would you recommend a kid in like maybe middle or high school? What would you recommend?
My flippant answer would be abandon hope, all ye who enter here. One of the things is over the years, I think there's been an increased influx of people who want to get involved in this industry at a time when there isn't enough of it to maintain a living. Actually, by the time I got in, I think that was already changing. I mean, Magic was kind of like a little boost to the industry overall, but a lot of the other venues, magazines no longer really exist anymore. That was a venue. There were a number of magazines that used illustration. The book work has changed, and it's more graphic design now than illustration, so that's a large part. Things like movie posters used to be a feature for illustration. No one illustrates for that anymore. But now there's there's more concept art. So there's other places. It's not necessarily illustration for print. There's other places where you can be a creative artist. Video games, but even then, like just being a pure concept artist in video games is hard to do. You usually need 3D skills as well, and like to be a 3D artist. So it's rough. It was always a rough industry, and I think in many ways it's rougher now. I think every artists that come up have to end up. You always had to be a business person as well as a creative to be in this field, but I think increasingly that business aspect has grown. Like you need more of that because you're going to need to essentially fend for yourself without publishers being the ones who are providing the majority of your income. You're going to have to find ways to create your own IPs, to create products, and then to market them in a world where there's a million artists creating IPs and trying to market them. Everyone's got their book, their comic book, their character thing they're trying to make, and so that competition, even though there's a lot of people that are seeing that that's the direction the industry needs to go, and that the direction they need to go to thrive in the industry, there's also just a pool of so many artists out there doing that. So it's intensely competitive.
So business acumen would be higher.
Business acumen, and and I do mean this. I think if a lot of people want to be an illustrator or an artist because there's kind of a glamour about it. It seems, like, you work from home, you get to be creative, you get to make money while you're doing it. There's all these great things and they're
in
great.
your pajamas all day.
They are, and those things are legitimately good aspects of the career. But because it is so difficult, and there's no benefits, no sick pay, no retirement, no vacation time, none of those things, it's hard to sustain a life doing it. And if there's anything else a person could do that they think they could enjoy doing to make a living by, I'd actually tell them to do that, and then just to paint, around that, versus, try to pressure themselves to really kind of earn a living. The housing is so expensive. I mean, like everything, it's not easy to thrive. It's harder than ever to thrive in these days.
It's a tough market, I'm sure.
Yeah, and a lot of artists, they want to, and I get this because I did this. At the first opportunity that they think they can strike out and be full time, they want to try to do that.
Sure.
And then they end up living essentially kind of in some kind of destitution for years and years because they're just trying to hold on to this identity of being an artist, and maybe not willing to say, you know what, I can have a full-time job doing something else I enjoy and that brings me satisfaction, and then be an artist around that. Like that's a totally respectable thing to do.
Sure.
But a lot of times people just, they want the identity of having been that artist.
And I actually hear that a lot from multiple industries. People want to be their own person. They want to be out there and doing their own thing. And even I'm self-employed, but I had a full-time job for years before I finally created enough income to do it full-time. So that's actually good business, sound advice in whatever industry you get into.
A few years in, towards the late 90s, I kind of hit my own slump. I was really busy for the first few years, there was so many card games coming up and things. There was always work to do. Most of it didn't pay great, but there was a lot to do.
Sure.
And I don't know if I burned out or what happened, but I hit a real slump around 99, 2000, and kind of just in a funk, and I didn't know what to do about it, and I decided that I just needed to eject for a little bit. So I ended up getting a job in the video game industry for a little bit, doing some graphic design, packaging design, and things like that for about a year. Might have stayed a little longer because it was interesting, and I learned all my Photoshop skills there. I grew up, before Photoshop was a big deal.
Right.
And by 2000, it was evident it was going to be very necessary. So I learned a ton of skills doing it. But then 9/11 happened, and that actually affected the game industry quite a bit at that time. I ended up getting laid off, and I felt like I had my head back on again. So that's when I got back in the game.
Yeah,
I've
even done that, pulling yourself out of a situation that just seems hopeless.
Yeah.
And gaining some structure with even a
Gaining
corporate job.
Gaining some skills, gaining some structure, gaining some perspective and distance really helped a lot. And so when I came back in and started, doing more work again around 2001, 2002, I felt like I was much better prepared, ripened in a sense, to use my earlier terminology. And there's a way in which I'm really grateful that I had those early years in my early 20s to work as an artist and to essentially grow while working. There's a real sense in which I don't feel like my career in its professional kind of modern matured sense probably didn't start until 2003. So those first 9 years, I was in the industry, I was doing work, but I had it was time and place that there was just so much of that kind of low-paying churn work that you can do, and magic at the same time. That it allowed me to gain my skills on the job, and that doesn't happen anymore.
I've heard that before. Actually, an artist's early work they didn't really consider full-fledged illustration. Obviously, people talking to other artists.
There were always moments along the way where certain pieces I did were me at my best, and me in an example of who the artist I was going to become.
Right.
And then there was a lot of crap, frankly, in between that. Soul Warden would be an example of one of those pieces. I'm so proud of that piece. Technically, I know I've come far from there, but it's in the line. It looks like what I'm doing now.
Sure.
It's in that direction.
Yeah, it holds its own against those other images.
Yeah. Where some of the other early pieces from that period, they might have kind of done the job in an era when magic, wasn't as technically competitive as it is now. But looking back on it, and even at the time, I knew that it's like this is off my game. I wasn't consistent enough to be able to do Soul Warden, more regularly. I was, it's hard to look back and see how that happened, and yet it doesn't happen now because the game has ramped up so much that I wouldn't survive.
Sure.
I barely survive now.
Well, and yeah, I mean, we're our own worst critics, so I can
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Randy. I know
Of course, Jeff.
you've got to get back to your day, and I appreciate you sharing some of your experiences with us.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.